Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk a little bit in this episode about integrating the Helix with the Eventide H9. I have a particular use case that I'm going to go over, but obviously there'll be a range of things you can find to do with this. First question some people might ask is, why would you integrate the H9 with your Helix? Obviously, the Helix has a wide range of really great quality effects. So there's a few reasons why you might want to add on another box like the H9. The first would be DSP allocation. The Helix has a finite amount of processing power. It'll get you a long way, but if you start doing complex setups, dual IRs, dual amps, you may get to a point where you want to farm out some of that processing to an external unit so that you can get into those more complicated setups. With the H9 in particular, it has a pre-post function, so it allows you to, in mono, insert the H9 at two different places in the signal path, and we'll go over how to set that up a little farther along here. It offers you obviously a range of different effects and algorithms, a lot of the same categories, but different algorithms, and there may be an effect that you really prefer in the H9 that's just not available or just not the same to you in the Helix. Also, with some of those algorithms, delays and reverbs in particular, the H9 offers you a freeze or infinite function with the hot switch. So by stepping on a button, you can hold a reverb out. I know a lot of people have workarounds to set that up on the Helix, but with the way I have it set up using the Barn 3 aux switch, I can just assign that button on the aux switch and I'm good to go. So again, for this particular case that I'm going to demonstrate where I'm trying to get this B3 organ sound going, I'm using that hot button as a fast, slow button for the rotary sim. The last reason I can really think of for my particular needs is that if I'm using the Helix as an audio interface, then I can use the H9 as an outboard effects processor from my DAW. So I could route audio through the Helix to the H9 and use it as an insert effect or however that's set up in your digital audio workstation. So I want to talk about a few things in addition to just, basic configuration of both units to get this going. I'd like to talk about the cabling and signal flow, at least the way that I have it set up, what I'm using for power, and then a little bit about the Barn 3 aux switch and how that integrates, how that gets set up. And then finally, I'll go through kind of the MIDI configuration for both units to achieve a few things, including preset changes with snapshots and sending out MIDI clock from the Helix to control the tempo or time on the H9. All right, so to get this all up and running, I have to make a few connections between the Helix, my electro-harmonic C9 that I'm using to generate the organ synth sound that I'm going to be using on one of my snapshots, and then the inputs and outputs of the H9, as well as the MIDI connection to the H9. So I want to communicate MIDI program and some control change messages between the Helix and the H9. So I'll connect the MIDI out through of the Helix to the MIDI in on the H9. I could then also connect the MIDI out through from the H9 back to the Helix. What this would allow me to do is, for example, if I had an expression pedal hooked up to the H9, I could transmit that expression data as MIDI to the Helix. So it would be like the Helix was seeing another expression pedal. And then I could do things like crossfade. So I could have the mix of an effect on the H9 go up as the mix of an effect on the Helix went down. So I could crossfade between those two effects if I wanted to. Or just use it as another external expression pedal. The C9 in my current setup is connected to effects loop 1. The send of effects loop 1 goes to the input of the C9, and the output of the C9 goes to the return of effects loop 1. Effects loop 2 is going to send to input 1 on the H9, and output 1 on the H9 will go to the return of effects loop 2 on the Helix. The send of effects loop 4 will go to the input 2 on the H9, output 2 on the H9 will go to the return of effects loop 4. This gives me the ability to bring in and out the C9, and then I can activate the H9 in pre or post mode. So on the presets on the H9, you can save it as pre or post. In pre, it will only use input and output 1. In post, it will only use input and output 2. When you're in pre mode, input and output 2 will be bridged, so it will just go a straight connection. No effects on that. And then vice versa, if you're using input and output 2, input and output 1 will be bridged. So it'll be a direct signal of the input 1 to the output 1 without going through any effects on the H9. So that way you could keep, if you wanted to, both loops active in your signal path on the Helix. The H9 will automatically do the routing for you. I choose to kind of turn the loops on and off just because I don't really want to have the signal going through the extra wiring or through the H9 if there's nothing going on there. So I have the C9 and the Eventide H9 on a Pedal Tray Nano board. I'm powering with a Seox Atom power supply. The audio cabling is the Lava Mini ELC kit. And the way the power works with the Seox, if you're going to combine two of the outlets, which I have to do here to get enough current going for both the C9 and the H9. So if you're going to combine two outlets, they stipulate that you need to combine the similar outlets or the like outlets. So there's two 100 milliamp outlets and then two 250 milliamp outlets. So you have to combine 250 with 250 or 100 with 100. You can't mix a 250 and a 100, or at least they strongly recommend that you don't. So I have the two 100s joined going to the C9 and the two 250 milliamp outlets joined to go to the H9. And then I'm using a reverse polarity cable from Seox as well. One of the reasons I have this on a Pedal Tray Nano is I don't use this all the time. So I'm not always using the H9 with the Helix. If I want to, then this board will fit in the mono tick bag that's on my mono guitar case. So it's very easy to just pop it in there. The Helix goes in the Helix bag and I'm on my way. If I don't want to take it, easy enough to leave it out, or to take a small backup board that I have, which is 3 Strymon pedals that I can just use, if the Helix were to freeze or something weird was to happen, then I'd have a backup board. One thing to note here on the power is that the C9 requires a certain voltage at startup, or I'm sorry, a certain current at startup in order to operate properly. So it's really weird, but it needs something like, let's say 300 milliamps in order to get going. If the incoming current is below that, then it goes into this weird state where when you activate it, it just mutes the signal going through. The Seox doesn't provide enough current at startup to get the C9 going. So what I have to do is I have to plug in the Pedal Tray Nano board, the Seox power supply. Then I have to cycle the power on the C9. So once the Seox is going, it's obviously providing enough current to feed the C9 properly. And so when I cycle the power, the C9 works perfectly. This has happened to me for a long time with the Electro Harmonics synth pedals. I noticed it first with a B9. So just maybe a tip out there if you're using one of these Electro Harmonics synth pedals with a power supply and for some reason it's not passing signal, if you cycle the power on that thing, it'll take care of the problem 9 times out of 10. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Barn 3 aux switch. This is an aux switch that's available online for addition to your H9. It's basically a base plate with an aux input jack that mounts to the bottom of your H9, and it provides 2 additional switches plus an output jack for either a tap, tempo, or an expression pedal. The way I have it set up, the left and right foot switches on the H9 act normally. So the left foot switch on the H9 standard foot switch is the active bypass foot switch. The right foot switch, when held down, engages the tap tempo, and when touched once, increments the presets. Then with the 2 additional switches I get from the aux 9, the way I have it set up is that the bottom left switch becomes the hot switch, so it activates whatever is assigned to the hot switch in the preset. So for example, in my Leslie rotary sim, that's the fast slow switch. And then the right switch becomes the decrement preset. I don't really need the increment decrement buttons because I'm sending program changes from the H9 to control which preset I'm on. But I leave it set up that way in case I wanted to create a list on the H9 where I would just take the H9 on the Pedal Train Nano board with the C9, and maybe I would just, use it as an outboard effects box for a small footprint on a stage or something. So that way, if I do a grab and go like that, then I already have the increment, decrement, preset functionality already set up on the Aux9, so I can quickly go through the presets. And when you save a preset list to the H9, you can also save it as a shortened list. So I could just have 10 on there, and when I keep incrementing, it'll go back to 1 after it passes 10. The Aux9 manual gives you some of the setups and configurations that you can do, how to use the left switch in either the forward or back setting to configure it based on if you're using an external tap tempo or an expression pedal. There's some limited functionality. So when you have a expression pedal hooked up to it, for example, the right foot switch mimics the heel down position. So it's sort of an instant heel down on the right foot switch. When you're not using either a tap tempo or an express pedal in that side jack, you can configure that right switch to pretty much do whatever you want. And then the manual also gives you the ring, and tip assignments, depending on which configuration you have, so that when you're navigating in the H9 settings in the control app, you know which switch is assigned to what. All right, so here are my MIDI settings on the Helix. Starting from left to right here on the first page, I have the MIDI bass channel set to 1. So I have the MIDI channel also on the H9 set to 1. You can set these MIDI devices to Omni so that they'll send and receive on all channels, but I really want a direct line of communication without anything else going to a device that I don't intend to send. So that's also why next I have the MIDI through set to off on the Helix. So if it's receiving any USB MIDI commands from the computer, it's not going to pass those along to the H9. My receive MIDI clock is off on the Helix, but my send MIDI clock is on so that I can send tap tempo information to the H9. Tempo select is set to per preset BPM. I don't really use those or concern myself with those too much. On the next page for the global MIDI settings, I have MIDI over USB on so that the computer and the Helix can talk to each other, but again, the MIDI through is off, so it's not passing along any of that information. I have MIDI PC receive to off. I don't want the Helix to receive program changes and switch presets on me. I have MIDI PC send set to off. That's so that if I do switch presets on the Helix, it's not going to automatically send a program change message down the line. And then I have duplicate PC send off. This is I think relates to the snapshots or other instant program change commands that you can set up on the Helix. It is smart enough to know that if you've previously sent a certain program change message and you switch to a snapshot where that program change is also an instant command, it's not going to duplicate the message. But if for some reason you did want it to duplicate the message, you can turn that on here in the global settings. So here I am in the Helix HX Edit app and the H9 Control app, and I'm going to first go through some of the configuration for H9 Control, or the H9 pedal through H9 Control. So if I go over here to pedal settings, I've got general settings, tuner. Tuner, you can, I think, adjust the calibration of the tuner, or you can just have an instant tuner there through the H9 Control app. Input gain and level meters, always set your input gain on your H9 so you're not clipping. Aux switch mappings. This is going to allow me to, with the Barn 3 switch, determine what the functionality of the extra switches is. So I have decrement preset set to foot switch 3, tip plus ring. That's going to be the bottom right foot switch now for me. And then their performance switch, aka middle foot switch, is set to foot switch 2, which is the ring. That's going to be the bottom left switch for me now. 2 top buttons on the H9 itself, 2 bottom buttons on the Barn 3 switch. And I don't have anything else set up here for aux switch functionality. MIDI settings. So we've got the MIDI receive channel set to 1. Again, the MIDI send channel on the Helix is also set to 1. Assign MIDI CC message to pedal functions. Right now I have the performance switch set to MIDI CC 0. That was for a different configuration I had set up where I was actually using the expression pedal on the Helix to simulate the hot switch or the middle foot switch. Toggle tuner is set to MIDI CC 20. Why 20? T is the 20th letter in the alphabet. That's kind of crazy obsessive. Activate pitch bend. I'm not even sure what that's all about or why that's set up. Must be a default setting. Going back here, MIDI clock. I have enable MIDI clock input set to yes. Enable MIDI clock filter set to no. H9 will stabilize an unstable MIDI clock signal. For right now, it's fine. I haven't noticed any instability. It'll also lag the tracking if it does that. Enable MIDI clock output? No. I don't have anything connected to the MIDI output right now, so it's not really an issue. MIDI output mode is set to transmit. Again, there's nothing connected there, so it doesn't matter. If there was something connected there, it's pretty likely that I would want it just set to transmit anyway and not pass through any MIDI information it's receiving from the Helix. MIDI over Bluetooth, I have it for no right now. If you enable this, then you can send the H9 MIDI commands over a Bluetooth device, an iPad, an iPhone, or even an Apple Watch. And, program change receive map. This is the standard program change map, but this is really my favorite thing about Eventide pedals is that you can go in here and assign any program change number to any preset. By default, it starts at 0 for whatever reason. So 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3. It'd be kind of nice if the default map was 1-to-1 mapping, but there you go. Right now, I'm only going to be dealing with these first 3 presets on the H9. And I will get back into my preset list so you can kind of see that going. Right here, sorry, let's load the pedal, make it active. So right here, 1, 2, 3, that's kind of what I'm going to demonstrate here on the Helix. So going back over to the Helix, first let me just mention this palette down here is from Keyboard Maestro. It's an automation app that I use at work a lot, and I've started using it at home. I don't like to really learn keyboard shortcuts or where stuff is buried in the menu. So if I find I'm using something all the time, I just create a Keyboard Maestro shortcut for it. Keyboard Maestro will simulate keystrokes, so I could do keyboard shortcuts for any particular program. And it will also send MIDI messages. So if your digital audio workstation receives MIDI commands, then you can set that up for transport control options or whatever you'd like. But you can basically just ignore that because I just have it set up to show and hide the command center right now really quickly. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the whole signal chain here. Mainly what I want to focus on are the effects loops. Effects loop 1 is, again, going to my Electro-Harmonic C9. Effects loop 2 is going to the input 1, output 1 of the H9. Effects loop 4 is going to the post input 2, output 2 on the H9. And you can see here I have the pre set up before this serial path splits. So it's before all my overdrives, etc. I like my phasers before my drives, and that's what I'm using it for here. So that's where I've placed it. Placement of the B9 is largely just so it can be after the compressor, but early in the chain. The B9 favors the bridge pickup for tracking. So if I wanted to, I could add an EQ in here that would come on when the B9 comes on to maybe help it track a little bit better, no matter which pickup I was on. But I haven't set that up yet. And then the post loop on the H9 is set after my speaker cabinets here, but before the rest of my effects. In this particular case, the H9 will not be running in stereo because I'm using it in pre-post mode, so it's not possible. So I want that mono signal coming before any other stereo effects. So when it goes into my computer, it has a nice stereo sound still from any reverbs or other effects that I might have on. Maybe not true stereo, it might just be basically splitting the mono to left and right because there's no real stereo happening with that effect, but there it is anyway. All right, so let me just go over the presets or the snapshots that I have set up. First snapshot I have is just home bass. So this is going to be my bass tone with a little bit of slapback delay coming from the H9. So your standard kind of country slapback. I have a reverb on here. Let me just turn that off real quick. Yep. All right, and then my second preset is basically the same thing, but with a little more drive. Turn that reverb off again. Then my third snapshot is called phase. And here I'm going to add the reverb back in, turn on pre-loop, input 1, output 1 on the H9, where I have this phaser set up. For all your wailing-y kind of country needs there. All right, and then finally, I have snapshot 4 set up for my organ sound. So the C9 comes in, the Leslie Sim over here, Jazz Rotary, comes on. And then for whatever reason, I have 2 reverbs on. I'm going to turn one of these off because I just want the spring reverb on. All right, here we go. And that's what I got going on. So let me get into the instant commands here and what's going on per snapshot. For home bass here, if I open the command center, I have on MIDI channel 1, program change message 0 being sent with this snapshot. That's going to equate to preset 1 on the H9, and it's going to activate this slapback delay. For snapshot 2, Dirty Dirt, it's going to be the same thing. MIDI channel 1, program change 0, slapback delay. So if I'm coming from the organ sound, it's going to send the program change message. If I'm coming from snapshot 1, home bass, that is also the same slapback delay. It's not going to send any program change message because I have duplicate program change set to off in the global settings. So it's going to be pretty intelligent about whether or not it sends the program change message. For snapshot 3, I have it set up to send on MIDI channel 1, program change 1, which equates to preset 2 on the H9. So that's going to be my phaser that comes in on that snapshot. For snapshot 4, which is the organ sound, it's going to send on MIDI channel 1, program change message 2, which equates to preset 3 on the H9 for the Leslie simulation. So just once again, home bass, I have H9 slapback coming on post. Dirty Dirt, I've got more overdrive on the amp, and then the same slapback delay coming in post. For phase, I have the H9 pre-loop coming in, and then I have the reverb coming on because I'm losing my slapback delay, I'm losing my ambience. I don't really want delay with an organ sound, so just add a little reverb there. I'm sorry, this is the phaser. I don't really want delay with the phaser either, so I'm just adding a little reverb there. Organ sound, likewise, I don't want delay, so loop 1 comes on for the C9 loop 4 comes on for the rotary sim, and then add just a little bit of spring reverb there. And then finally, what I have going on is this switch right here. So I have foot switch 8 set up to send a MIDI control change message on MIDI channel 1. That's what the H9 is receiving on. This is that in the pedal settings, MIDI settings, program change, receive map, or assign MIDI CC messages to functionality. Toggle tuner, MIDI control change message 20, MIDI CC 20, and this only works when it's when the value is set up. So originally when I loaded this and the value was at 0, it wasn't toggling the tuner on the H9. When you set it to 127, it does. This is a momentary switch. It doesn't latch, but it does turn the tuner on the H9 on and off. So now if I want to, I can have it set up so that foot switch toggles the tuner on the H9. If I prefer the tuner on the H9, then I can use that. But what you should also do is assign to that foot switch, or make sure on that foot switch when you activate it that this block, the pre-block, is active, so that you're sending signal to the H9, but probably doing it pre rather than post. So you're probably going to want to send a signal that's before any distortions or amps to the tuner for accuracy. You're just giving it a better signal. Okay, one thing I want to just demonstrate here is how the MIDI clock is actually communicating to the Eventide H9. So again, I have MIDI clock send set to on from the Helix, and then MIDI clock receive set to on the H9. Now, when I use the standard tap tempo button on the Helix, it will send that time information via MIDI clock to the H9. And if you watch the BPM on the phaser, you can see it adjust as the time on the H9 adjusts. So here we go, I'll tap it in. There you go. Works like a charm. It's, 172.9 on the Helix, 173. So it's kind of rounding. Maybe there's a higher degree of accuracy on the Helix versus what the H9 can do, or maybe it's actually 172.9 on the H9 and it just displays 173. For my purposes, it's all good. So that's how I have my Helix set up to communicate and work with my H9. Thanks for watching.